so good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Humanist Association of Toronto's presentation of the HAT Speaker Series. We're honored today to have with us Gary McLelland, the Chief Executive of Humanist International, the world body of humanism. I wanted to wear a shirt in the Humanist International signature color of International Raspberry, but I'm afraid this is as close as I could come, Gary, in tribute to yourself today. This presentation could not be more timely, considering HAT's pending application for membership with Humanist International and our increasing desire to stay alive to the concerns of humanists throughout the world. After all, Toronto is the most multicultural city in the world by many measures. With HAT's membership application still undecided, please be on your best behavior at this meeting today. Gary will be listening to us as carefully as we'll be listening to him. Now please unmute yourself and join me in welcoming to HAT, Gary McLelland. Take it away, Gary.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. And that is a beautiful shirt, a very beautiful shade. Okay, I'm going to share my presentation now. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, yes, thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you all this morning. As I think we were chatting before we started formally, my name is Gary. I'm the Chief Executive of Humanists International. I work from home, as all of our staff do, so I'm based in Glasgow on the west coast of Scotland. And so that's where I'm speaking to you from this morning, or this afternoon for me. So very pleased to be able to speak to you. I'm going to speak to you and try and give a general introduction to the work of Humanists International. As Richard said, you guys are applying to join Humanists International, which I'm sure will be a very smooth process. And I think for me, the purpose for me really is just to try and give you a bit of an insight into what Humanist International is, what we have been, what we do now, the many ways in which hopefully Humanist International will be a platform for you guys to get involved internationally and you know, to contribute to the international movement in various ways. Humanist International, hopefully, as I will be able to demonstrate, is a strange organization in that it is, on the one hand, a small, punchy human rights organization, but on the other hand, it's a very old institutional global federation with a very serious and sort of proud history, and it wears these different hats and these different modes, and it can be quite a complex organization despite being deceptively small. So I'm going to try and demonstrate some of that, also with some nice pictures so that the presentation isn't too dry. I'm also aware that I do have an accent, as often pointed out to me, that I do have an accent. So if at any time I say something which isn't clear, or if you would like to ask any questions or clarify anything, please do feel free. I know we have a Q&A at the end, but I don't want anybody to be struggling to understand what I'm saying. So if there is anything that we'd like clarified, please, I won't be offended if you want to ask for some clarification. So please do feel free to do that. So I will get started now with the main presentation. So this is a photograph I just want to show you. This is the founding Congress of what was then called the International Humanist and Ethical Union, and now Humanists International. This was an unpronounceable, for me, place in the Netherlands in 1952, not far from Amsterdam. And somewhere in this audience, in this photograph, is Julian Huxley, Aldous' brother, who was the founding president of Humanist International back in 1952. To give a bit more of a contemporary reference, this is a photograph taken from our General Assembly last year, which happened to be in Glasgow. And the speaker on the left-hand side there is my colleague Emma, who's our Humanists at Risk coordinator. And you can see on the panel there is all the board members and myself. So that's just to give a bit of a juxtaposition between the last 70 years. In general terms, as Richard said, Humanist International is a global federation of democratic humanist organizations. This is hopefully a very general graph to just give you an understanding as to where the sort of power and the structure of the organization resides. So we meet every year in what we call a General Assembly. The General Assembly is made up of the member organizations. So we are an organization of organizations. It's the organizations that have a vote and decide on the future of Humanist International, not necessarily individuals. And these organizations meet, they have votes, they discuss issues of policy as well as internal organization, etc. And amongst their members, they elect a board of directors. The board of directors is actually 10 at the moment, and the board of directors then appoint a team of staff, which I lead, to carry out the day-to-day work of Humanists International. This is a little photograph of some of our previous General Assemblies. I think most, in fact, all of these photographs are from the General Assembly in Iceland in 2019. If you recognize anybody, do shout out. This is just also some photographs of attendees at our last General Assembly, which was, as I said, in Glasgow in June 2022. So on the right is Michelle Farley from Humanists Barbados, quite a recent Humanist International member. In the middle is Viole from Uganda. She's part of the Ugandan Humanist Association. This is two of our colleagues from India, from two humanist organizations in India. These are various humanist representatives from Peru, Guatemala, and somewhere else, Puerto Rico, I think. This is, you probably recognize the man in this photograph, Andrew Copson. George, this is the Chief Executive of Humanists UK, and he is also the President of Humanists International. The President is elected for a 3-year rolling cycle. The person to Andrew's right is Sonja Egriksson, who is the previous President of Humanists International. So anyway, that was just some photographs to give some sort of colour and personality to Humanists International and to give you an insight into what it looks like when we do these things. Now into some more of the sort of corporate stuff. So Humanist International vision is that we are inspired by humanist values. We are optimistic for a world where everybody can have a dignified and fulfilling life. And it's our mission to build, support, and represent the global humanist movement and work to champion human rights and secularism. And to do that, we use our main values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. So that's the kind of ethos and the strategy and the guiding lights that lead the work that we do at Humanist International. And we have these 4 strategic aims, which have been more or less the same for the past 5 to 10 years. We review and tweak these every year, and with input from our members at the General Assembly and so on. But more or less, we've had something similar to these 4 strategic aims for the past 5 to 10 years. So the first one is really making sure that the global movement, the humanist organizations around the world are networked together, and that we have humanist organizations in different parts of the world. The second one is making sure that humanists are not persecuted or at risk because of their identity or their beliefs. And the third one is making sure that our views and our values and our principles are accurately represented and promoted at the various international political and civic institutions around the world. So, for example, the United Nations and other things like that. The fourth aim is really our internal aim. So that's one, to make sure that we have enough money and paper clips and all the usual sort of gadgets and gizmos that we need to keep the show on the road. What I'm going to do throughout this presentation is I'm going to go through the first 3 of those aims and just try and unpack each of those a little bit, and to tell you some of the work that we do and some of, I think, the key achievements that we've made over the past few years in getting that work done. And in doing so, I'll try and talk about where the Humanist Association of Toronto and all of our other members play a really important part in this work that we do. So this is just a little diagram to show you about our staff team. So this is the staff team is in the green and the sort of pink color, I guess. And so you can see we run the organization on quite a small staff team. Everybody's usually quite surprised at actually how few staff we have compared to the amount of work that we are able to get done. And if going from left to right on the screen, so we have Jean, who's our finance and operations manager, and she has a couple of consultants to try and help her keep on top of the books and all the different, for example, we have, I think, 5 currencies over, 7 different bank accounts with 2 different legal entities, because there is no, There is no such thing as an international registration, so having to maintain all these different sort of registrations and accounts and so on is very complicated. We have Emma, who's our Humanists at Risk coordinator, who you may have been in touch with before if you've ever sort of referred on a case of concern or somebody who's contacted you to ask for support with asylum, etc. You may have been in touch with Emma. Then moving on, we have Vic, who's our fundraising and development manager, and she manages Javen, who's our membership development officer, who I'm sure Richard and others you've been in touch with over the application process. Javen is also in charge of our Young Humanists International Programme, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. Then we have Elizabeth, who's our Director of Advocacy. So she spends most of her time traveling around to meet with the United Nations, the European Commission, the Organization of American States, the African Union, all these various international bodies, and also working with our members to try and advocate at these institutions for our values, to try and highlight cases of concern and problems on the ground. And then moving on to this sort of red box here, this just denotes that these are programmatic staff. So these are the green staff are ones that are part of our core team, and the pink boxes represent that these are sort of externally funded project staff. So we have 2 external funded projects at the moment. One is what's got the very snappy title of Humanist Professionals Network Manager. And basically what this is, we've been given some funding for the next 3 years to do basically an assessment of the various humanist services and professional operations which are available. But at this time, it's just in Europe, but as we move forward, it's going to expand globally. And we're thinking here about things like humanist celebrants and chaplains, humanist counsellors, humanist educators, all the types of ways in which humanist organizations provide services and life stance and meaningful life engagement to people around the world is something that we're trying to do an assessment of, to understand what the current scale and scope of that work is, with a view to trying to kind of improve it for the future. And then finally, we have Rachel, who's the project manager of our IDEAS project. IDEAS is it's probably technically a backronym, so it stands for Increasing Diversity, Equality and Security in South Asia. And basically what this is, we have a program which is dedicated solely to humanists in South Asia, primarily India, Nepal and Sri Lanka. This has been identified, as I will hopefully demonstrate later, as one of the most risky areas for humanists around the world. It's where the vast majority of the requests for support that we get come from. So we've been very lucky to get funding to do a dedicated stream of work with security aimed at this part of the world. So we get together humanist activists from a range of different countries in South Asia and train them on physical security, psychosocial security, digital security, as well as other sort of activist skills and so on. And this is meant to be a form of early intervention before the need for crisis and relocation sort of kicks in. Anyway, so that's an introduction to our staff. Again, because this can be a bit dry and sort of humorless, I just wanted to give you a couple of photographs here. So we took the decision at the start of 2023 to shut down our office in London. We've maintained an office there for about the past 20 years or so. But as we moved during the pandemic, like a lot of people, to being online and remote and so on, we actually decided that we don't need to have an office anymore, that folk can work from home. Sometimes, for example, Rachel, who's in the center of the screen here, she works sometimes in Washington, DC. So the American Humanist Association have an office there, and they've offered to accommodate her in their office for some time if she's there. So we have these kind of flexible arrangements, but generally we've got fine without an office. So what we decided, instead of having an office, is that we will have a weekend away with all the staff together once a year. So about a month or 2 ago, we all got together in Sofia in Bulgaria to do a sort of staff development weekend. And as part of that, we did this cookery course together. So I can sort of describe who the people are on the screen. So going from the far left to right, the person about to, I think, attack a tomato is Jean, who's our finance manager. The person with the baseball cap is Javen, our membership development officer. In the center of the photograph is Rachel Abrego, our program manager. moving on to the next photograph, we have Emma, who's our Humanists at Risk coordinator. Standing behind her in a slightly unflattering photograph, which I now just realised is not the greatest one, is Vic, who's our fundraising and development manager. Then you've got Jean again and Javen again, and then you've got me. And there's obviously some people missing from that photo, but anyway, that's the team. So now I'm going to move on to talk a little bit more about the kind of 3 areas of our program work, and hopefully give you a bit more of an insight into what it is that we do and some of the things we've achieved over the past few years. So again, please feel free to interrupt, to ask questions, clarify anything at all. Here's just a little map, which you can see. This is a map which is available on our website, which you can click on and read the names and contact people and so on. But this is a map of the members and associates of Humanists International. So we have members and associates in over 65 countries around the world. You can see still quite a cluster in Europe. Probably 2 reasons for this. One is historically a lot of the founding members of Humanists International were European. Also, Europe has a large collection of very small countries in a particular landmass, so that's also part of the reason why you see so many dots there. Humanists International has members and associates in about 30% of the countries of the world. So we're able to serve about 1/3 of humanity, which also means sadly we're not able to serve about 2/3. So yeah, so there are many humanist, well, there are not many, there are some humanist and sort of non-religious organizations which are not members of Humanists International, but most are, certainly. So here's a very boring looking table, but I think quite interesting. So there's 2 pieces of data on this table. The top of the table is the numbers of members and associates by each global region. So what we mean to say by that is how many members and associates does Humanists International have in, say, Africa or Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands, and so on and so on and so on. And you can see there at the moment, we have currently 121 members and associates combined. At the end of 2022, it was 130. There's been 9 people who haven't renewed their membership. Maybe BC is one of them, actually, I can't remember. So hopefully that will sort of go back upwards again. But it's interesting, I think, just to note down the distribution here. And I think what's even more interesting is the table at the bottom, the sort of bottom half of that table, which is the percentage of countries. This is takes a bit of thinking to sort of click in, but the percentage of countries in each of these global regions that has at least 1 member or associate. So what we mean to say by that is that the higher this percentage in the bottom half of the table, the more countries in that region have a humanist organization, at least one. Whereas the lower the number, the fewer countries in that region have a humanist organization. So for example, Central Asia, which is like the stands, Tajikistan, so on and so on, generally quite a repressive anti-human rights place. There is no countries in Central Asia with a humanist organization. But if you go to somewhere like the US and Canada, which is obviously just 2 countries, both of those countries have some humanist organizations. So you can see that there's a kind of spread of humanist organization availability, if you like, in that country. And the reason that we measure this is that this is part of the work that the board and the staff do, so that we know where we should be diverting our resources to. So it's very clear to us, for example, that if we're looking to give out grants for development work, that the US and Canada is probably not a priority. But at the same time, neither is Central Asia, because it's clearly a situation in which the environment is so hostile that it's not going to be productive to try and do work there. But somewhere like Africa, where we have many very well-established humanist organizations, yet it's not serving a large proportion of that continent. So that that's why we sort of measure these statistics, and of course they change over the time. But in general, it's and I suppose as well, it's also important to acknowledge that we have a preponderance of humanist organizations in, for example, Europe and the US and Canada, but less so in other parts of the world. And this helps to sort of guide the decisions we make about resources and so on. Also, just I mentioned about grants. I guess it's just worth mentioning that as part of the money that our members and associates give to us, and you probably know from the joining process that we ask associates to donate about 0.5% of their income to Humanists International as an annual fee. And we ask our members to donate 1% of their income to us as a fee in order to fund the activities of Humanists International. We also look for other sources of income, but that's what we ask for as a fee. This money then we use to give out in grants, for example, and other things. So in 2022, we spent more than £100,000. I don't know what that is in dollars, I'm afraid, on our growth and development program. So this money was allocated to support project work by our members and associates. We give out that money only to what the UN defines as developing countries. I know that term is problematic for some people, but there's just literally a chart on the UN website that we use, which helps us, I think, guide the use of that money. These projects will usually fit into one or more of the following categories: organizational development, digital development, regional networking, ceremonies development, young humanists, and our introductory pop-up events, which we call Café Humaniste. Through the projects that we supported in 2022, we reached over 60,000 people. And by the end of 2022, 12 out of the 16 projects that we funded had met 75% of their project outcomes, and the rest are still ongoing. So that's been a very successful piece of work. So the number of countries with members has been steadily increasing. As I mentioned, we're on over 65 at the moment. When originally back in 1952, when we started, there was only 5 countries that came together: the US, Netherlands, UK, and 2 others, India and Austria. And we're now up to over 65. So that was the number of countries in which we have at least one member, and this chart shows you the number of actual members that we have throughout the years. So you'll notice that there is a bit of a skew in this data around 2019. There was an interesting thing that happened then. So from 1952 up until 2019, we'd been sort of collecting members, and we've been very reticent to verify and challenge and sort of revivify those members. So essentially, if you join sometime from the 50s onwards, you just were a member for life unless you told us you want to leave. So in 2019, we did quite a serious sort of shake-up of our rules and tried to find out which organizations were existing or not. And that's why you see that significant drop. But nonetheless, I think, sustained progress throughout the years, which is encouraging to see. Oh yeah, so this is just a bit more information, as I was saying there, about the grants program. So we had these 17 grants that supported the amount of money that was given out, number of events, and so on and so on. This is actually an old slide, so you can see it's based on the Q2 figures halfway through the year, which is why some of the numbers are lower than what I just said. But here's some photos, which I think help me sort of intuit a lot more what's actually happening. So you can see on the left here our organization, Freedom Centre Uganda, which is also doing a lot of work at the moment campaigning against the Kill the Gays bill, which is going through Parliament yet again. Every sort of 3 to 5 years, the Ugandan government or the Ugandan Parliament decides it wants to pass the Kill the Gays bill, and that's something that they're actively campaigning against at the moment. But anyway, they do a lot of really good work reaching out to young people and talking about humanism and critical thinking and so on. And then if you move forward a little bit to the right, then you can see this organization in Singapore, the Humanist Society Singapore, who will be hosting the 2024 World General Assembly. So if you're not able to come to Copenhagen, which you obviously should, but if you're not able to for some reason, then you must come next year to Singapore. Again, to the right, you'll see this photograph of the woman in the headscarf. So this is a mental health program that we fund. It's run by an organization called Faithless Hijabi, and they're a collection of ex-Muslims that provide mental health counselling support for primarily ex-Muslims, but they've expanded recently to speak to people who have left any sort of high control conservative religious group. Catherine, did you want to ask a question?
Okay, I can't see the screen when I'm asking, but it said something about other religious groups, as if as if humanism was a religious group, and I just wondered if you can explain that. It said working with your religious groups. So,
which one was that?
it's the second one. It says working with other religious groups and communities.
Oh, I see.
I was going to ask the same thing. Thank you, Catherine.
Okay, I see. So one of the things that they've been very keen to do in a lot of humanist organizations, but particularly in Singapore, is to do sort of talking about the second one from the left then. So in the Humanist Society of Singapore, as well as a lot of humanist organizations, they've been very interested in inter-religious and belief dialogue. I guess that's what they're talking about here. I guess your question was, why did they say other religious groups? Does that imply that humanism is a religious group? Is that the question? Okay. Well, I wouldn't have thought that. I mean, certainly knowing the Humanist Society of Singapore, I don't believe that they consider themselves to be a religious group. Obviously, humanism, generally speaking, isn't a religion. So I think that's probably some sort of loss of nuance in typing. I wouldn't really read much into it. There is a very interesting thread of humanism and religion, which is totally separate from this, which is about the ethical culture movement. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Catherine, but there is, especially in the US and to a much lesser extent now in Europe, there is a sort of brand of humanism, which is they consider themselves to be religious humanists, and there is to some extent experience of humanist organizations who have used the term religion to get recognition by the state in order to be treated equally with other religious groups. But anyway, I don't know why it's written like that, but it's probably some sort of typo or something. I wouldn't read much into it other than that, but yeah. I see what you mean now, though. It does sound a bit like strange. Anyway, the last one on the right here is the Humanist Association of Uganda, which has been doing a lot of training recently of wedding celebrants and other sort of ceremonies and things like that, which we've been providing support to, which is really encouraging. It's a very encouraging, I think, program of work because it can help generate income to support the other parts of the organization. So it's something we've been very keen to support. Okay, let me talk about the second part of our work now, which is looking at the supporting humanists who are at risk because of their beliefs or identity. So, and this is where a lot of the kind of casework support that we do comes in, which is maybe, Richard, is this something that you guys have had any contact with us about in terms of casework or referrals or anything like that?
We do refer people to Humanist International in their casework, but we don't, we don't do any ourselves, certainly. But we have been, the referral process is in place, but that's as far as we've gone.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so a lot of information on these charts here. So let me try and just sort of explain a bit what's going on here. So the total, so the top graph we've got here is the number of active cases that Emma works on at any one time, who's our casework humanist at risk coordinator. So you can see here this green line is the current year caseload. It's updated on a fortnightly basis, and the blue line is last year's caseload. So we used to aim to maintain a maximum caseload of 20. However, it's become increasingly clear to us that many of the cases that we're dealing with are of such serious complexity and many requiring ongoing support over a number of years. Of course, the obvious one being Mubarak Bala, who I'm sure many of you will know about. That actually, it's very difficult for us. Emma is the primary member of staff that works on this, but she also works on other programs. So we don't even have one dedicated person to work on this full time. And we've been trying for the last 3 years to find funding for this. It's just an incredibly difficult thing to get support for. So we have to make the very difficult decision to limit our number of active cases to 7 at any one time. Of course, this means that many times we're having to say no to people. We have a process of vetting and prioritization that we do when we get a referral in, but far, far too frequently, certainly more frequently than any of us would like to do, we have to say no to people. And we do have a number of resources and other organisations that we can signpost people to, but of course we would really like to be able to support them ourselves. So that's what the top line is talking about. The line at the bottom, so this is the number of cases on the waiting list versus the total unverified requests for support. So what we're trying to do here is to capture with the line graph is how many cases have come into us, and we've checked them and said, yes, this is a legitimate case that needs our support, but we can't help you right now, so let's just put you to one side and wait for the moment. So you can see that's, you know, jumping up and down between 50 to 75. This is a significant number of people. And then the line graphs at the bottom, what we're trying to say there is each month, how many new requests for support, which we haven't yet vetted, so they might be bogus or duplicates. Usually not, but they might be, are we getting every month? So you can see that it's reduced slightly over the course of 2022 from a total, you know, from a very high total in 2021, but it's still a very significantly high number of cases. Sylvia, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I'm wondering if there is a coordination between the work that International does with Amnesty International.
We do coordinate quite well with Amnesty International. Obviously, Amnesty and also with Amnesty and its local bureaus, you know, so Amnesty in Nigeria and various ones around the world. And I guess one of the signs of success for us in recent years has been that Amnesty is much more willing to take on cases which we refer to them. In the past, humanists and non-religious people have been seen as kind of annoying interlopers and sort of agitators, and not in themselves serious human rights defenders and you know, people with a serious positive worldview. And part of the case we've been trying to make is that, you know, these are legitimate people who deserve support from Amnesty, the government, the UN, and different things like that. So over the course of the last few years, we've seen that Amnesty are more keen to take on our cases and support us, and that's been a huge success, I think, for us. So yeah, definitely, and as well as other organisations, Freedom House and many other NGOs.
Thank you.
So where do these requests for assistance come from? It won't come as any surprise. And again, this links back to what I said before about us having a specific program in South Asia. So you can see here that when we look at where our referrals come from, you know, the country highlighted there is Afghanistan, and this data comes from the fall of Afghanistan in 2021 with the US-led withdrawal. And, you know, I mean, I think most of us, you know, regardless of your views on foreign policy, couldn't help but just be absolutely devastated at the way in which all the people and the human rights activity that flourished in Afghanistan over the last, you know, 10 years has just come unstuck in the matter of hours. So we actually had to make an incredibly difficult decision in 2021 to not accept requests for support from people within Afghanistan, because the chances of a safe exit from Afghanistan once the US had led was basically zero. And we just simply couldn't, you know, we weren't able to help people cross the borders. So we were able to support some people who'd already crossed the border, but yeah, it was an incredible mess. But anyway, as I said, you know, we're trying as much as possible to be preemptive about these things and to do some sort of positive intervention work. So yes, we've also been increasingly making requests for support to other organisations, as I just mentioned to Sylvia, to organisations like Amnesty and so on. Bigger NGOs with higher budgets than us can often be a source of support for our cases. So we've been trying to use them as much as possible. So yes. So in terms of the actual work that we do, you know, the work that we provide to these cases can fall broadly into 4 categories: legal expenses, medical treatment, relocation costs, and shelter, food, and other basic costs. Relocation is usually the one that people have foremost in their mind. In actual fact, it's usually, or it tends to be the fewer type of cases that we support is for relocation, because it's simply such an impossible thing to do. I mean, I think Canada my perception as an outsider is that you guys have, I think, a slightly more open view towards migrants and asylum seekers than certainly the US and many European countries. But the rhetoric that we're used to dealing with politically around migrants and asylum seekers is just incredibly toxic. And so even going down that road is a very, very tricky road to take people down. But it's often what people have in their mind when they contact us. They think, you know, some people think genuinely that we can send planes and helicopters to pick them up. And of course, you know, that's just not something that we're able to do. Also, you know, just thinking a little bit about the patterns of the persecution, you know, so we've been supporting, you know, hundreds of people for the last few years, and these trends emerge throughout the work that we do. You know, we see it's bullying, discrimination, social isolation. So, you know, what's it like to be the only humanist in Islamabad, you know, in a family of, you know, conservative Muslims. Impunity, you know, so the complete lack of interest from the state and from local authorities about the persecution which you're experiencing. The fact that in many countries the law is on your abuser's side. You know, if you're a free thinker or a heretic or a challenger, in many countries around the world, the law backs up the people who are abusing you and not your own freedom of speech. And of course, the bottom one really is what we're saying is secularism. You know, if you live in a country which has picked one religion to be of special treatment, then everybody who doesn't belong to that religion, or even the mainstream sect of that religion, is going to have a really bad time. So these are the things that we try and sort of tease out and use the experience that we get from this work in some of our reporting and campaigning around the world. Of course, like every aspect of our lives, COVID-19 made everything worse. Not everything worse, but it made a lot of things much worse. And we saw that, you know, people having to suddenly spend 24/7 in a household with their conservative family, or, you know, we had people who were supposed to go for interviews at embassies to get emergency travel paperwork and so on, and all of a sudden these opportunities were just taken away from them. So that was a very difficult thing to do. And of course, fundraising became almost impossible, and it became much more difficult to do this work during COVID. So in terms of the approach that we take with this work is we've been doing casework work on an ad hoc basis since 2016. The work that we did became much more serious in 2020, which is when Emma, my colleague who's our Humanist at Risk coordinator, joined us, and she had previously worked at PEN International, which is the Freedom of Expression Writers charity, and she brought 8 years of experience doing this very work with her, and she developed a whole range of policies and procedures for us to do this work on a serious and meaningful basis. And so we follow this kind of 5-step program. The first of which is always the most important one. Whenever there's some sort of crisis, or, you know, somebody gets into trouble, we become under immediate pressure to act, to make statements, to do things, to text people, to, you know, to take all range of different actions. And one of the things that we've really learned in recent years is to be very careful in this first step, and to make sure that we have all of the information and get, you know, kind of 360 view of actually what's happened, and is it as serious as you think, and you know, did they, you know, and just to challenge everything really, to make sure that you're confident, and that gives you, I think, the solid base to base the rest of your campaigning work on. And the second thing, which is of the utmost importance, is to get consent to act for people. I've seen many human rights organizations over the years just immediately go out and start speaking on behalf of people, you know, that they've seen on some Twitter account has been, you know, subject to some bad behavior. But actually, if you think about it, you know, if you were to take, let's just say, a humanist activist in Pakistan, all of a sudden, for them to be associated with one of the most high-profile non-religious organizations in the world might do them serious harm and might undermine the chances of them getting help. So, you know, there are sometimes cases which we want to act on, but actually, when we do a sort of review of who's best placed to do it, we are not the best people to take a public role in this case, and we have to hand over to someone else, or to do the work anonymously, which is sometimes the case. So yeah, so those two first points are the really important points, I think, to make sure that if we're doing work, it has to add value to the campaign to help this person, and it has to be with their consent. And anyway, that's a kind of obviously a reviewing ongoing process. So here we have, oh yeah, so this is a bit of out-of-date information actually, but some information relating to the type of support that we provide as in 2021. So as I mentioned before, you can see that on the sort of top right, about 1-2 o'clock on this diagram, the actual support that we provide in terms of relocation is like less than 7% of the total support provided. And yet, obviously, it's one of the more emotive and sort of totemic issues relating to supporting individuals. But with a lot of the time, it's advice and referrals, solidarity, and being available to someone to tell them that you understand what they're going through and that that their experiences are valid is very important. Some positive reflections on this very difficult area of work. You can see that of the people that we've supported, 71% report positive outcomes to us. They say that their situation has improved as a result of the work that we've done. And 25% say the situation remains unchanged. So yes, broadly positive, which is good. The third area of work I'm going to talk about is our advocacy work. So this is the work that we do to influence and lobby at international institutions and so on. So there's a copy of our report on the left-hand side of that screen you can see there. So this is a report that we were funded to do, really a good practice guide into what we call freedom of religion or belief, which is the United Nations, forget the name of it now, Human Rights Declaration, Article 18 sets out that everybody has the right to freedom of religion or belief, and that includes the right to change your belief, your religion, to have no religious belief, and to hold a positive atheistic or humanist belief. And we were funded to write a guide about that, which was inclusive of the non-religious aspect of it. We see, especially with your neighbours to the south, an increasing sort of nationalistic, Christian nationalist spin being put on these human rights, that human rights around religion is actually the human right to hold a Christian belief, at the exclusion of LGBT rights or women's rights and so on. But of course, a sophisticated view of human rights must hold that they are interdependent and based one upon each other and have to be realised together, we would say. So, is everybody still with me? I feel like I'm getting a bit heavy now and a bit information dense, but I hope it's I hope you're following me. But we're heading towards the end now anyway. So, and I'm still trying to think of a good answer to George's question, by the way. But anyway, we'll get there. So, thinking about advocacy, then our aim is that human rights priorities should be based on humanist values, and they should be influential at international institutions. That's the value that guides the work that we do with advocacy. So, what are our human rights priorities that we base on humanist values? So, of course, free thought and expression is a really important one. It's been a bedrock and a kind of pivotal principle of humanist and atheist campaigning for a long time. Our opposition to blasphemy and apostasy laws remains resolute. Thirdly, this is one which I think is, in my view, not held with sufficient importance, and I don't know, it seems to get lost, I think, sometimes with humanist organizations, as cultural and artistic rights. And it sounds like from the speaker program that you guys have got and from the different people that you hear from, that maybe you guys are an example of an organization which does hold in high esteem the cultural and artistic rights issues. But I think sometimes maybe within the humanist world, and this is my personal experience as well, we can be far too intellectual and maybe not enough cultural and artistic. But anyway, that's maybe just a personal view of mine. And of course, the promotion of critical thinking being, again, of fundamental importance. So I don't know if anybody recognises this person. This is Mohammed Sheikh Makater, who was a Mauritanian anti-slavery activist. He was actually imprisoned by the Mauritanian government, I think in 2015 or 16, and held incommunicado for a long time. So if you think of the current situation that Mubarak Bala is in, when I was starting to get involved in Humanists International, Sheikh Mercator was the case of prominence that we were all talking about, and you know, that everybody was sort of writing petitions and postcards and everything about. And very pleased to say, you know, I think about 3 or 4 years ago he was released, and now lives in somewhere in Europe. And he occasionally will go and make speeches for us at the UN, and he, you know, keeps in touch with us, and you know, it's been a very positive outcome to quite a grim case for a while. But anyway, you can see that Sheikh Mercator Mohammed has been speaking for us at the UN on anti-slavery issues in Mauritania. So what are the human rights priorities again? So we're talking about things about equality and non-discrimination. So within that, we're talking about harmful traditional practices. So for example, this will be our members in India and Nepal who campaign against caste discrimination, against Kariti, which I learned about when I went to visit our members in Nepal, which is a very misogynistic practice of related to the Hindu religion, which is when women are in menstruating, sometime before and after menstruation, they're considered to be unclean and basically forced out of the household to live in a sort of wooden hut. And the experience is that many women die from exposure. Many women will try and light fires to heat this little hut, and many have died from smoke inhalation. And it's just this, of course, incredibly toxic, misogynistic, anti-women cultural practice, which is defended by some Hindu people as being part of the Hindu tradition and so on. But anyway, it's always been our firm view that traditional cultural defense, you cannot defend, you know, human rights abuses by reference to culture. Of course, LGBTI rights, we've been one of the staunchest and most you know, firmest proponents of LGBTI rights from the 50s onwards, and sexual and reproductive rights. This is another photo, so that this, you might recognize the chap in the middle of this photo. It's Dr. Leo Igwe, who's a board member of Humanists International, and he is one of the founders of the Nigerian human rights movement. He also founded this organization, Advocacy for Alleged Witches. So Dr. Igwe did his PhD in Germany, but it was based on the witchcraft accusations in West Africa, in particular Nigeria, and he was funded, his project was funded to run a peer education program to try and educate people away from witchcraft accusations and the persecution of alleged witches. He's got a TED talk, by the way, if you're ever interested in like a inspiring talk about humanism. He did a TED talk called Why I Am a Humanist, and I think it's one of the most remarkable cases for humanism I've ever seen. He's a very good speaker. This is Rosalind, who's one of our board members, and she's been a very staunch advocate for LGBTI rights in Ghana. So you can see she's talking here about her opposition to one of the anti-LGBT bills in Ghana. They get in Ghana a lot of these US like family faith evangelical groups, you know, visiting them and trying to stoke up division and sow seeds of division. So again, talking about the human rights values, the human rights priorities based on humanist values. So the third one being defending democracy. So, you know, we've been, again, since the founding of the organization in the 50s, very, very strong defender of democracy. Something which I didn't think would be, you know, I feel like it's one of those concepts that we're having to, again, defend on first principles for the first time in my lifetime, like why democracy as opposed to, I don't know, some sort of technocracy, I guess, but that's been a bit of a strange thing to recognize. But anyway, for all these reasons, we've been defending democracy as well. And this is from the Hungarian atheists. The UPR stands for Universal Periodic Review. That's a UN mechanism. The UN reviews every country around the world every sort of 5 years to make sure it's making progress on human rights commitments. And we support and train our members. So that's something that you guys might want to do, is we provide training and support for our member organizations to write UPR reports and submit them to the United Nations. And that can often involve, going to Geneva to make a statement in support of that UPR submission, or doing it online via Zoom or something like that. So I realize that I'm probably running over my time, Richard. I hope I'm not doing too badly, but I can sort of finish things off quite soon. Okay, so the way that we do this, so one of the ways we do it is by influencing high-level stakeholders. So this will be the traditional way that you might think about lobbying and advocacy, so making statements to the UN. So if you go on our website, you'll see lots of pictures of people standing up at the building in Geneva making statements. Also training officials. So as I mentioned, we did this training program on what is freedom of religion or belief, and we trained various officials at the European Union and the UK and different places on here is what an inclusive vision of freedom of religion and belief is. Being consulted on reports and building up networks and relationships with UN officials, such as the UN Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, who's the main UN expert that reports on freedom of religion or belief around the world. And then the other way that we try and do these things is by more of a partnership approach. So in partnership, first of all, with our members. One of the amazing things about doing advocacy for Humanists International is that we have contact with 121 grassroots humanist organizations like yourselves, who are experts in how to be a humanist in Toronto or wherever. And we're able to sort of draw on that support and, connect people with the relevant officials to paint a really rich picture of the experience of humanists around the world. One of the ways that we try and do that is frequently we'll produce briefings. So for example, we had a couple of years ago from our members a lot of questions coming in about anti-choice, by which I mean anti-choice around abortion services, activism that seemed to be happening a lot in their countries. So we were able to put a report together saying, here's where we're experiencing these reports of anti-choice activists and far-right Christians and all this type of stuff, and produce a report so that our members nationally were able to go to their governments and say, look, this lobbying that you're getting is part of a coordinated campaign that's happening around the world, and you should be aware of that. We don't obviously have the money and resources to match our opponents sort of one for one. One of the best things that we can do is to try and draw connections between the funding of these groups and what their objectives are, to try and criticize them. And of course, we work with other NGOs, issue joint statements and letters and different things like that with Amnesty and all these good organizations. So that's how we try and achieve our advocacy aims. The last aim, which I haven't put a slide together on because I guess it's kind of boring, is around our sort of internal aims to have staff and paperclips and fundraising and things like that. Very happy to answer any questions about that. I just feel like it's probably, I don't want to just like read you out the accounts because I think that might just put everybody to sleep. Anyway, that's me reached the end of my presentation. Thank you for bearing with me. I hope it wasn't too boring, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gary, for a very informative presentation. Everything we wanted to know about Humanists International. So again, a brief round of applause for Gary for his presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And we will go to a Q&A now. So in our normal fashion, if you would like to put up your virtual hand, which can be found on the participants menu or on the reactions menu, depending on your version of Zoom. And so let's go to George. You've been very patient in waiting. So George, if you have a question for Gary or want to re-ask the one you asked before.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I would say humanism is the essential issue in the civilized world, right? Otherwise, it will be like the animal world, the strong eat the weak, right? So humanism is the very important and very essential element issue in the civilized world, and also I think that there is a conflict in between humanism and capitalism. There's a great conflict. Why? In a capitalist society, the capitalists are pursuing the greatest interest only. Ordinary people are subject to capitalists. In order to live and make money, often lost self-discipline, and there's no dignity in the capitalist society. And also the value are distorted. Sorry, the value are distorted. And the capitalists are not motivated by compassion. That is different to the humanism. You know, humanism main concern is motivated by compassion and also affirming the dignity of each human being, right? So in the money world, it is opposite to humanism. The capitalists are so powerful, they can collude with the governments and use money less sin. So I want to ask Gary, sorry, how do we promote humanism in the money world? And how to implement humanism in the money world? And how can we live dignity in the money world?
Okay, George, thank you very much.
Sorry.
George, thank you. You've asked a lot of questions there, and I think Gary needs
Thank
to
you,
try
Gary.
to catch up to you. So thank you very much for your questions, George. So Gary.
Thanks, George. I think the short and the most blunt answer to your point is that I don't think humanism, or at least Humanist International, has a sufficiently good answer to your question. I think that within our policies, we acknowledge that humanism and the kind of positive vision we have for the world is at conflict with a lot of aspects of capitalism. I'm going to put a little post in the chat here from one of our policies which talks about economic injustice. I think that most leaders of humanist organizations would agree with your assessment. My view is that they wouldn't, again, have a sufficiently good answer to it. I think probably humanists have the same view towards capitalism as what most sort of liberal and sort of left-wing political organizations would have, which is that it's not great, but we can't imagine what to replace it with. I don't know. I mean, that I'm sort of slightly speaking from a bit of a personal experience here, I guess, as well, because it's not something that we have formally discussed or anything, so I can't really give you a kind of official view. But I certainly would think, I feel very confident that everybody at our General Assembly would agree with your stating of the problem. I guess humanists tend to have within them a broad spectrum of economic political views. I mean, not extremely broad, you know, but certainly people who would agree with more and sometimes less state intervention in the economy. So I don't know. I feel like your question is really, really good and important. I don't think I'm able to do it justice with an answer, I'm afraid. It's a bit disappointing. But
Okay.
I'll post this link anyway, which might be helpful.
Oh, sorry, Gary.
George, we're gonna go on to another questioner at this time, and we'll come back to you later if there's time.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, George. We'll go to
Thank you.
Sylvia now. Sylvia, what would you like to say to Gary?
Gary, your presentation was not boring. It was extremely important, at least for me. It's very dear to me. The question that I have is, how can we effectively, from Toronto, as an individual or as an organization, can support your cause? That's really something concrete that we can do in order to support.
Definitely. I mean, there's a number of different ways. So once you're members, you'll get regular emails from myself and other staff. You know, we oftentimes will have we'll send a request to say, look, this thing is happening. For example, let's say there's going to be a legal hearing with Mubarak's case. Can you go to your local MPs, your local you know, governments, local authorities, and raise with them this issue? I think I can't underestimate how important that is, because there are so many ways in which this can have an international effect. So I don't know if this is true or not, but I just for an illustrative purpose, Canada might be negotiating a trade arrangement with Nigeria, or it might be about to send a trade envoy, which is very often the case, or there may be some sort of mid-level official diplomatic reception happening. And the more people who know about the concerns of this case, and also from a democratic point of view, if your local representatives know that it's something which 20 or 50 people are talking about, they know that this is a vote-winning issue for them. You know, they know that they will get support in their districts by talking about this issue. So as much of that as possible that can be sort of raised at a local level feeds up into the international level, into the sort of national level. So that's really important. I think being a strong local and national group is really important, because, you know, if we want to build humanism around the world, we can only build it on solid foundations. So it's really important to have these you know, groups locally and nationally. The other thing is that one of the things that one of the roles I see Humanists International and myself in particular is fulfilling is simply as like a connector of people. You know, so I've tried to give you like a snapshot of some of the people that I find really inspiring within our movement. But of course, there are hundreds and hundreds of people that are leading humanist organizations around the world. And I would love to be able to, you know, email you, Richard, with, you know, here's somebody that can come and speak, you know, from Argentina, or somebody who can come and speak from Germany or India or whatever. And, you know, I think, especially in the way things are politically at the moment, you know, I think humanists are the ones that founded the idea of cosmopolitanism, of being a sort of global citizen and stuff. And I think we have to try and embody that ourselves, and to try and resist this, you know, really pessimistic nationalism that's happening at the moment, and to try and reach out beyond the borders. So yeah, of course, participating. I mean, there's more of the formal ways which you can participate in Humanists International. So there's things like we pass these, for example, the policy which I just posted in the chat there. We debate these different policies every year. So you can submit motions, you can submit policies. For example, you know, George can work on his economic policy and submit that to the General Assembly, and that will cause a debate. And then, you know, we could end up adopting a policy on, you know, changing the economic system or something. And it sparks conversation and debate and moves everything forward. So yeah, there's a number of different ways, and of course, coming to the conferences for me is the thing that is by far the most motivating thing. You know, to meet people from humanist organizations around the world. I don't think there's any sort of you know, any better way to get motivated than that. But yeah, there's a range of different ways, and just try and you know, reach out to people and connect with them, and yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you, Gary. Karen, you've got a question for Gary or a statement?
Yes, Gary, thank you so much. I'm so impressed with your organization for so many reasons. Just a point of clarification. Well, first of all, I really like your emphasis on human rights and the active support of them. I just wanted to clarify, what is casework? Is it supporting individuals, or is it supporting groups in there? And is it for individuals whose human rights are being violated? Is that the main parameter?
Sure. So in terms of casework, the main focus of that work has been on supporting individuals, but particularly individuals who identify as humanist and whose persecution is specifically because of that humanist belief that they have, or their sort of public identity as a humanist. So in the past, we've supported people for a range of more broad human rights issues, but because of the increase in requests we've had to limit that much more strictly to people who are humanists. and who have been persecuted because of that aspect of their belief. And so if we get requests for other types of thing, we will refer them on to other organizations. So that's primarily what we mean when we talk about casework, is supporting those individual humanists like Mubarak Bala and other people like him. In recent years, because, as I said, we're only able to support 7 of those people at one time, and you saw the pile of people that were on the waiting list. One of the things that we've tried to do is to do more preventative work. So that's where this South Asian program came in. We write some reports sometimes about humanists at risk and the persecution of humanists, and the purpose of that is, in an ideal world, we would be able to get money to support 200 humanists at once, but that's not the world we live in. So what we hope to do in the meantime is to say, well, if Amnesty International and the Canadian government and whoever, if they agree with us that humanists are being persecuted and need support, then maybe they can provide the support that we can't at the time being. So that's the kind of second, more strategic thing that we try to do. But yeah, primarily it's supporting people who are humanist and they're being persecuted.
Even people in Canada, right?
Well, there's one person that we're supporting who's currently in Canada, who's called Lina Menemechalai, who's an immigrant, who's a sort of asylum seeker who's arrived in Canada from India, who was persecuted for blasphemy there. But I guess in theory, we would support somebody if they were persecuted in Canada for being a humanist, although I don't think we've ever experienced that.
Well, I mean, we're far from perfect in Canada. For example, one of our big issues is indigenous reserves, and some of them don't even have water, for example. They can't turn on a tap. That's just something that comes to mind. So I'm thinking of things like that we need supported. But of course, I realize that there are greater causes around the world. One quick question. Are your members countries and cities or also individuals?
That's a good question. The answer is a bit complicated. Primarily, our members are all organizations. So we have 2 categories. One is members, which are generally national organizations like Humanist Canada. And then we have associates, which are primarily regional organizations like Humanist Ottawa, Humanist Toronto, or sometimes specialist agencies. So for example, in the Netherlands, there's a Overseas Development Agency, which is a humanist agency, and they're an associate of ours. We had a Humanists on Kiva, which is this sort of micro-lending platform. So they were an associate. So that's primarily who our members are, who have the votes and decide how things go. Now, in 2019, when we did this big review, we said there are some countries in the world where you couldn't set up a humanist organization. So if you want to set up Humanists Saudi Arabia, that's not going to work. The same with other repressive humanist North Korea is not going to be happening. So what we said is, if you want to set up a humanist organization in one of these countries, you obviously can't, but you as a person can become an individual member with us and be in communication with us. But that is not an option, which is it's a free thing. So it's not available to purchase. It's not available for the vast majority of people, but it's only available for people that we want to be in contact with that can't in any way otherwise join. So that's the only way in which we would have individual members.
Great, thank you very much for your question, Karen, and thank you, Gary. I had a question about kind of humanist leadership, I suppose. When you think of yourself, I see, of course, you're bound by kind of legal strictures to call yourself the chief executive or chief executive officer of Humanists International. But I've seen in interviews that you kind of think of yourself as more of a facilitator
Yes.
for linking together people in your organization and beyond. And certainly within HAT, we don't have a president, we have a coordinator. That is, the bylaws and the Constitution set out that as a democratic organization, we don't want to have anybody as kind of the figurehead of our organization. Do you think there is actually, though, and I think that that's a trend that carries across many humanist organizations because of our values, but do you think that we could actually benefit as a world organization from having someone that is more of kind of a figurehead, like a leader who puts themselves out front at the tip of the spear to advance the cause of humanism? And is someone like Andrew Copson as president, is that more his role in the organization? What do you think about that concept?
Yes, I actually do think that. Andrew, as you said, is our president. He does do a lot more. So, for example, at our General Assembly, he'll make some of the big leadership speeches, and he'll do sort of the visionary speeches that we do. He's elected directly by the members of Humanist International, so he has a mandate to sort of have his vision approved by the membership and so on. And I think there is definitely a place for that. I think I recognize what you say, Richard, about we have a tendency to want to be perhaps a bit what would the word be, a bit more self-reflective and a bit more ego-checked than perhaps other movements might be, which I think is a massive strength, by the way. But it also means that perhaps we're not very good at claiming credit for the good works that we do, and for being so confident sometimes when we should be. I said before, people will often say to me, like, Gary, it seems like you guys do so much work. How do you manage to do all this good work with so few staff and resources? And one of the things that I say, without irony, is that we just have so much better ideas than our opponents. Like our values and our ideas are just so much better. Like there's very little persuasive work involved when we try to get people on board with campaigns, because it just seems so obvious that we're on the right side. So I think we probably could do with a bit more confidence in our values and our work. And yes, I think the work that Andrew does as president is really important. So Andrew's indicated that he'll be standing down as president within the next 2 years. And so, we've been, as an organization, we've been making a lot of commitments in recent years to being having a more diverse leadership. So, I mean, I'm personally not the best representative of that, but we do. If you look at our website now, you'll see that our staff is increasingly spread around the world. Our board is again, we have various mechanisms in place to ensure that we always have broad representation of the world on our board. And I think that's really important. And I think the board of Humanist International is committed, as far as possible, that the next president will be somebody who's not from Europe, and somebody from another part of the world. So that, I think, is very important. And yeah, I think that role of having a leader is important. But again, it's somebody who has to be accountable to the members and has to represent that broad spectrum of opinion. But yeah. But I think it's important that that's not me. I think partly because I don't think that's my particular skill set. But also I think, like I'm just hired by people as a staff member. I have, no democratic accountability apart from to the board. And I really do see my job as more like a general secretary or something, more like a sort of a person who leads the staff team, but who helps the board implement their vision, which is democratically agreed by the members.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. Tanya, you have a question for Gary.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I just want to say I agree with Sylvia and Karen. I was very impressed by what your organization does, and also by your presentation. You worried sort of about being maybe too fact heavy, but I think that's exactly what we wanted. We wanted to know who you are and what you're doing, and you certainly fulfilled that. One quick question, you mentioned the TED Talk, Why Am I a Humanist? But I didn't get the name of the speaker.
I'll put the link in the chat.
Okay, thank you. And the other one was, and forgive me, probably my misunderstanding, but I don't get the relationship between an organization as a member and an individual member. So for example, I'm a lifetime member of HAT. Now, assuming that HAT becomes an organization member, does that then make me a member? But also, a lot of the people who come to this forum are not members. Now, I suppose they could always join HAT, but what if they wanted to become a member of your organization directly? So I didn't quite get that.
Got you. Well, thanks very much for that, Tanya. That's very kind. In terms of the membership thing, so essentially the way that we see it is Humanists International is a federation of organizations. So it's
Okay.
generally not possible for an individual to join that organization. So if somebody from Toronto got in touch with us and said, I really want to be a part of humanism, how do I join you? We would say, join Humanist Association of Toronto. That's the best way for you to get involved.
Okay.
But I guess the only caveat that I'm adding to that is that 99% of the time, our members are organizations, and we deal with whoever that organization elects as their leader or appoints or whatever. That's who we deal with. The only caveat to that is if somebody from a place where it would be too dangerous to start an organization wants to join, then they can join as an individual. And the reason for that is just we want to be in dialogue with these people. We don't want to just leave them out of the processes. But at the same time, obviously, it's not safe for them to set up an organization. So we just recognize that that's a kind of, you know, a bit of an unusual circumstance. But, you know, the number of these people is very small. It's not something that we actively advertise. It's really just a sort of a catch-all mechanism.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. Thank you, Tanya, for the comment there. Catherine, we'll go to Catherine in the room here now.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. These are, I assume, paid staff and full-time. And do you also have volunteers in the organization, or is it just a fairly small paid staff?
Yeah, so we have 10 full-time staff members who are paid. We do, so the board are all volunteers. In addition to that, we do have a handful of volunteers that help with, you know, we have volunteers that help us with IT sometimes, anybody that has any specific skills. We also have a team of, I think, about 20 volunteers that help us compile the Freedom of Thought report, which is our annual report we produce every year on the persecution of humanists in every country in the world, like a sort of state of the world humanism report. We have a team of volunteers that help us with that. So yeah, we do have volunteers that help us, and you know we're very happy to have volunteers. If you go into our website, you'll see there's a page about get involved, and there's ways of volunteering support there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. We'll go to Elka now. Elka.
Yeah, I've got a question about participating as a member group. What is the cost involved, and what are the responsibilities in both directions?
Mm-hmm. So the cost is, for an associate, the cost is 0.5 or 0.5% of your annual income. For a member, which is usually for national organizations, the cost is 1% of your annual income, and that goes to the costs that I laid out. In terms of the responsibilities in each direction, the minimum responsibilities are very small. So at a minimum, Humanist Association of Toronto would be required to report to us every year on its financial status, update us on who your elected or appointed leaders and secretary and chair and treasurer and different things like that. Also, to get this right, I think so you have the right, if you want, to attend the General Assembly, to vote on policies and motions, approve the accounts and so on, to nominate somebody for the board, all these different things, the kind of internal democracy. So that's the kind of minimum responsibilities. I think in terms of the other opportunities, there are just so many. I mean, I think we try, as I said before, to have different forums to facilitate communication. So every quarter we have a Q&A with Andrew, who's our president, and he gives an opportunity to talk about what's been happening with the board discussions and the board papers. So also a lot of the information which I presented to you on my slides, I provide a report to the board every quarter on what have we been doing, what's the membership numbers, what's the financial numbers and so on. I also share that with the members and associates so you guys can see how the money is being spent and so on.
Can I just for a second?
Yes, please.
Back to the thing you said before. I'm very bad at names, but the person you mentioned before who has the Q&A, is that open to all members? Like, could I attend that, for example, or is it a representative from Hatch who goes?
So it's up to Hat who you guys want to allow to go. So we basically make available this platform, but it's up to we invite the Humanist Association of Toronto. Who the Humanist Association of Toronto chooses to send is a matter for it, you know, so that's the way it works with us.
No, that's not answering my question. Are you saying that one person from HAT can go and be involved in that? But let's say if I wanted to go, I just couldn't go?
There's no limit to the number of people the Humanist Association of Toronto. It's just that I can't say that you're the right person, because I guess it's up to the board of Humanist Association of Toronto or whoever.
6 people wanted to go, 6 people.
Yeah,
could, no, say
that'd
to
be
the
fine.
public to go, and yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think, yes, I think what Gary's saying there, Elke, is that we could nominate you as a delegate, as someone who might be interested in being at that Q&A with Andrew Copson, and that we could nominate as delegates whoever we wanted to go.
Exactly, yeah.
Or approve if, you know, people wanted to go, yeah, okay, that's
Yes.
good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's difficult because each organization is run so differently. We put as much onus on the organization to decide how it wishes to engage. You know, and for example, when you think about some organizations have an elected leader, like a president. Some have an appointed one, like a chief exec or whatever. So we just call everybody the head of the organization. You know, whether they're a chair, a chief exec, or whatever, or a coordinator. You know, for us, you're the head of the organization, and you know the organization can have 3 heads if it wants. You know, it doesn't really matter to us as long as we have somebody that we can email.
All right, thank you very much, Elke. Thank you, Gary. I had a question, another question. This is more of a personal question, I suppose. I put you in the category as a leader in humanism. You're face of a very important organization with that, and so I'm thinking, going back to an interview you had where you characterized how the name change from International Humanist and Ethical Union, that often was because of being a very cumbersome name, was abbreviated IHEU or some verbalization of those letters, HU or something like that, and that the change to Humanist International put the word humanists in people's mouths and sort of made them verbalize that as opposed to saying something short form of that. And that kind of goes with an interest of mine in people becoming more outward with their humanist identity, I guess you might call it, or just being very much representative of humanism when they talk and using that word and getting people to normalize that. How important do you think that is for the cause of world humanism, for that word to kind of be pronounced, for people to identify as such, and to then explain, I guess, as needed, and educate people into what exactly humanism is all about?
Yeah, I think it's really important. The sound that you were talking about there was IHU. So the first ever General Assembly I went to, everybody was talking about this thing called IHU. And it sounded like, I don't know, at one point I thought somebody was clearing their throat. I thought, what is this thing that I don't know about? And it sounded very sort of in-group. And what they were talking about was IHU, the International Humanist and Ethical Union. There was another group which was called IHEO, and I had no idea what people were talking about. And what they were saying was IHEYO, the International Humanist and Ethical Youth Organization. So yeah, that was a bit of a struggle to know what people were talking about. But yeah, for me, I think it's very important. I mean, again, as I think you said earlier, Richard, you know, we tend to be quite a self-effacing and you know, humble group of people, and I think that's good. But I think, you know, I think from time to time should be confident and a bit more proud of the movement that we belong to. Again, I linked into this chat one of the pages of policy for George that talked about economics. I'd encourage you to have a look at that page, the policy page. You can go back on that page to 1952. I think there's actually some policies that predate the organization, because there was a precursor organization called the World Union of Freethinkers. Anyway, you'll see in that archive, you know, again, LGBT policies from the 60s. You know, you'll see commentary on the Cold War. You'll see commentary on issues in Cuba. You'll see, anti-colonialism movement, which humanists were massive in supporting. You know, the humanist organizations in India, most of the modern ones sprouted from the anti-British rule movement. And you're connecting yourself to some of the most amazing, you know, human rights and progressive cultural icons of the 20th century. So I think there is a need to be just a bit more proud and mindful and connected with the past of this movement, and also the future, of course, but in particular some of the key achievements of the past. But I think there's a sort of an awkwardness about, like, we don't want to all go on about humanism because we don't want to sound religious or culty or sort of like evangelical, you know, that if anything unites us all, it's that we didn't go down that route in life, you know, that we're kind of opposed to that approach. So it's obviously natural that we are uncomfortable with sort of group identity and being too sort of effervescent about our own beliefs. But I think, you know, and I'm not suggesting that we should all go about declaring it on the street and going door to door, but there's times and places where it would support your colleagues around the world for people to know that you and them are joined in an international movement and a belief system which is positive, it's real, it's sophisticated, it's historical, it's ancient, it's meaningful, and yeah, I think just be more proud of that fact.
Thank you, Gary. I appreciate that support and your views on that. We're going to go to Ronnie now. Ronnie is your first timer. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much for your very informative presentation. My question has to do with Palestinian rights, and I wondered if your organization has been involved at all in supporting some of the moves that have been happening at the United Nations, for instance, or just now the recent, all the anti-Palestinian, well, the onslaught and assault on Palestinians in the last while, because of Israel being much more expansionist every day, practically. So I just wondered what your organization has done or has been involved in, and also the fight for democracy, maybe just recently.
Mm-hmm. I think we don't see ourselves as specialists in the Middle Eastern conflict, and have been careful not to speak too much on that topic, knowing that, you know, it's a very sensitive topic with, you know, very specialized and sort of sophisticated geopolitical considerations. So we are, I guess, a bit mindful that there's better people than us to speak on that. However, we have in the past couple of years joined various UN initiatives condemning the expansionist approach of Israel around Palestine, and we actually issued a very rare position statement on that, I think in 2020 or 2021, to condemn the actions of Israeli settlers and, you know, the impunity or the condoning of that by the Israeli government. So that's probably as far as we would go on that issue. We did have a member in Israel, I think, until some point recently, which was obviously talking about these issues. We have, and I should say, I mean, I don't want this to be seen as equivocism or you know, but we have also in the past been quite critical of the authorities in Palestine for their poor track record on freedom of religion or belief and treatment of minorities. Not in any way, obviously, to draw equivalence between those two situations, but just in the interests of transparency. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Ronnie. We're going to go to Michelle in the room here now, and then we're going to go to Sylvia. We're winding things down here now, so if this is the last chance to put up your hand and make a comment or a question of Gary, we'll be wrapping up very soon. So in the meantime, we'll go to Michelle in the room here.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Gary. Welcome. Great to have
Thank you.
Humanist International here at HAT. I have a question. I'm on the steering committee of Humanist Association of Toronto. I have a question around recruitment. Like, for example, do your members, like meaning other humanist organizations around the world, do they bring up issues of recruiting new people? How do we do it? Are we doing something wrong? Yeah, you know, like things like that. Do brainstorming sessions around that? Like maybe bringing in people, delegates from each country. I'd totally be down for that if you do. So yeah, just that.
That's a good question. I know that a lot of organisations are finding it difficult, especially for the recruitment of board members. I know that that's something that people are finding very difficult. We haven't in the past had group discussions and sort of thematic sessions aimed at that, but that is actually a really good idea. So I'm going to take that back with Javen and discuss that with them, because I have had the same concerns being raised by a number of members, and I think there's probably an appetite to have a conversation about that. So definitely.
Wow.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michelle. What a great idea that is. But we could certainly do that on our own once we get into the organization a little bit, coordinate some of those conferences and get together with a lot of people to brainstorm those ideas. What a great idea. Thanks very much, Michelle. We'll go to Sylvia now. Sylvia.
I have a comment and a question. A question is going to wait for Copenhagen if I see you there. The comment to my group is that I receive emails from Humanists International, then it's very easy for all of us to be connected by following them through Facebook. And also, I think I get requests for donations for causes. If anyone in our group would like to participate and support them as an individual, that's possible. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia. And maybe one last question, Gary. We mentioned the Free Thought Report very briefly, but it's something that I want to put out a plug there. This year is the year for for the Free Thought Report to be rewritten for Canada. There's a 5-year cycle of every country on Earth is represented in the Free Thought Report, and a report is formulated, as I said, reformulated every 5 years. The Canada report is being put together this year. So if there's anybody that wants to be part of that, who believes they're tapped into what it's like to be a free thinker, a humanist, an atheist within Canada, and wants to talk about that experience, especially with relation to government and institutions that affect the outcomes for free thinkers and atheists, then you can get in on the rewriting of that report for Canada. But maybe, Gary, you could just talk about the Free Thought Report as a very important product of Humanist International.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Richard. It's such an important part of the work that we do that I feel bad I didn't get time to talk about it today. But in essence, we've been doing this report since about 2013. It's a massive report which covers every country in the world, with the exception of the Vatican, which we don't consider to be a real country. And it assesses those countries according to 4 different criterias. Particularly, it's more of a desk-based report, so it looks at hard indicators that we can measure from outside, like laws, policies, reports, other NGOs, and so on. And it tries to put together a report which highlights the law and policy as it relates to humanists, atheists, and the non-religious. So we use it to draw attention to patterns of persecution, the way in which humanists and atheists are targeted by states, and so on. And we have this, if you look at the website here, we have this kind of interactive map where you can go on and look at how your country's doing and how it compares to other countries and so on. So of course, one of the critiques that we often get, maybe this is give you a bit of an insight into the report, is every year we will publish it, and generally the United States will score better than generally Canada will. We'll get a lot of people get in touch with us very angry about this, some from different places, and I understand why people would think that, because I think if you were to, I forget who it was it Voltaire or somebody said there's this veil of ignorance test. If you want to live in a society, you must imagine that you don't know if you're going to be the king or a pauper. Which society would you choose to be in? Well, if you're an atheist or a humanist, would you choose to live at some place in Canada or at some place in the US? Well, you probably would choose to live in Canada, I would suspect. That's the impression that I get. But because our report is strictly based on laws, policies, and so on, it's also true to say that in the United States there is a very strict separation between church and state legally. There's no funding of state schools, which happens, of course, at various places across Canada, and so on and so on. So that's the veil of ignorance, exactly. Yes, thanks, Richard. Yeah. Yes, so that's part of one of the flaws of our report. But generally speaking, it's a very, very important tool, and I would encourage you to have a look at it. And yeah, one of the things that we will invite you to do as an associate of Humanist International is to contribute to this and send us links, send us articles, write some text for us, as much as you want to contribute to that report.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much, Gary. Well, it's been a pleasure to be here today with you, Gary, and sharing some of your wisdom and exactly what Humanist International is all about. Again, I echo the statement of a couple of people in the room today to say, I cannot believe you do what you do with the resources that you have. So you're really punching above your weight there, and I got to believe that as facilitator, you can take be a little less humble and take a bit of the credit for that, and having putting together such a great team, and for leading them through and creating all this good work for humanists around the world. So again, I thank you for being here today. One more time, please open up your mics this time. Open them up and give Gary a proper round of applause from the Humanist Association of Toronto.
Yay, thank you, Gary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary.
Very.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Gary.